Happy Sunday, everyone. Today we are talking about Mormons who are Marxists. Yes, they exist, and they are trying apparently to organize. A group that has recently organized calls itself Mormons with Hope for a Better World. We're going to look at this group's manifesto and how they're attempting to reconcile Marxism and Mormonism. Sounds crazy? I think it is crazy. We're going to unpack what they say and see what it's all about. Their tagline for their organization, they say that they are Mormon organizers working to bring forth and establish the cause of Zion. Their call to action on social media is join the struggle. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here's a video from one of the organizers a few months ago.
We're a left-wing collective of Mormon organizers working to improve the conditions of working class and oppressed peoples here in Utah and the nation. We must come together now and choose radical, active faith and organize. I want to invite everyone here to join an organization. Coming to rallies, protests, and demonstrations is great, but I need you to choose to consistently work with like-minded people to protect each other and build a better world. Workers of the world unite, trans liberation now, and free Palestine. Thank you.
Now, I first learned of this group in this online post that I saw a few months ago. This is the Salt Lake City Weekly, talking about a new group of Mormon leftists who aim to reclaim their faith from, quote, reactionary and fascist elements. Here's some quotes. Mormonism is actually revolutionary to its core, McLaughlin told the attendees at this little planning meeting they were having. It was always built to be antagonistic to the American colonial project and to carve out a literal kingdom of God where everyone could be equals and care for each other. It was only through the compromises it made through time to sustain itself that it kind of lost that spirit. It is this spirit, the article writer says, that Mormons with Hope for a Better World hopes to reignite among practicing and non-practicing Latter-day Saints. As a political organization, it aims to organize, advocate, realize material change, and rebuild a Mormon leftist space across the world and far beyond the occasional public protest. Quote, our religion has been co-opted by reactionary and fascist elements. I am sick of fascists getting to define my fate. All right, well, they held this organizing meeting in January, trying to get this off the ground. There's 13 people that come to these meetings. There's not many in the Venn diagram overlap between Marxism and Mormonism, but they do exist, and they have put together what they call a 10-point program for Mormons with Hope. We're going to look at each of these 10 elements and try and understand how they're trying to reconcile Mormonism and Marxism. But first, the struggle. That is their call to action. Join the struggle. Then their tagline. It's in the first sentence of their manifesto. The issue with Marxists and the struggle, they view the world as having a fixed pie, that it is a zero-sum game. There are haves and there are have-nots. There are greedy capitalists and there are impoverished workers, those who control the means of production and those who do not, right? I think this is extremely reductive. It's simplistic, even childish. It's flat out wrong that the world, to view the world in this fixed pie mentality, that for others to win, like the billionaire elite, whatever, that they like to excoriate and say, eat the rich, for them to win, that means everyone else must lose. That means the workers are losing, that the people at the top are taking it from others, so that it's this fixed pie, this zero-sum game. It's a flawed way of looking at the world, but then again, so is Marxism writ large. This struggle concept, here's how it's defined by the Jacobin magazine. It's a communist magazine. They say, the class struggle doesn't necessarily mean barricades in the streets and summary execution of plutocrats. That these things can result from struggle is a historical fact, but the struggle Marx is talking about is the social and political competition between classes, which is always present, whether in the form of wage demands, petitions, law changes, strikes, non-compliance, all the way up to armed revolt. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx describes how sometimes the capitalists will cave in to demands made via demonstrations and strikes. Other times, they'll resist until concessions are forcibly extracted. Only the relative strength of the sides determines the nature of the struggle. The whole point of Marx's method is to understand that the struggle is inherent to the capitalist system. It is objective. How socialists choose strategically to win the struggle depends on many factors, including the avenues available to them to win changes to the system. This is subjective. Whether we like it or not, the way commodities are produced under capitalism will always require struggle between the classes. Workers want more, capitalists want them to have less and less. So, of course, the struggle, this concept of the struggle, leads to overthrow, right? Forcibly extracting these concessions, overthrowing power, wresting control, right, from the bourgeoisie. The point is to tear down the power structures and to spread control amongst the worker class. So this struggle is inherently conflict-based. It's frequently violent and lethal as well, but it all centers around conflict. So let's keep this in mind when we think of these so-called Mormon Marxists who are encouraging people to join the struggle, who want to foment class division, who see this as competition that we must take from and cede to claim ground from the upper class people, the bourgeoisie, the people who have resources. We must take it and then redistribute it as well. That is the struggle. It is conflict-based. It is competitive in the worst way, politically competitive, rather than just using the market as a competition. Okay, let's now dig in with their 10-point program, their own manifesto, their Mormon Marxist manifesto. Here is point number 1. These are all things that they hope for. Again, Mormons with hope for a better world. So number 1, we hope and struggle for collective ownership of the means of production. It reads, we hope and struggle for a world where people hold all things in common, and there are no poor among us. Early Mormon leaders prophetically counseled that the wonderful growth of wealth in the hands of a comparatively few individuals and a few powerful corporations was one of the great evils in our nation. In a capitalist world, workers, having no means of production of their own, are reduced to selling their labor power in order to live. Capitalists have created a system that forces working people to give the fruits of their labor to the wealthy or to die. It necessitates disenfranchising an exploited class who live under the dictatorship of the ruling class. There is no emancipation for the working class unless we dismantle capitalism and collectively own the means of production. Therefore, we support the formation of trades unions and all combinations of the productive and working classes against capital that act deliberately as organizing centers of the working class in the broad interest of its complete emancipation. Only then will we, as members of the working class, be in control of our own collective destinies. Early Mormons recognized this and fought to maintain control over their own destiny through the collective ownership of the means of production. We recognize the necessity of a class union and combination of our labors for the promotion of our common welfare because we have learned of the struggle between capital and labor, and also the oppression of moneyed monopolies and faithlessness among people in political and business relations of life, making many of the necessities and conveniences of life precarious and uncertain. Therefore, we mutually hope and struggle for collective ownership over the means of production so working people can finally be free from the oppression necessitated by capitalism. Okay, so as you can see, they've got little footnotes and things. I mean, they're at once quoting from, the Book of Mormon and then Vladimir Lenin in the next sentence. It's kind of ridiculous. And so they say, we hope and struggle for a world where people hold all things in common. Well, what is that citation? It's 4th Nephi 1, verse 3. This is the post-Christ society. It's a voluntary cooperation based on living higher ideals. This is not a struggle. This is not forcible competition and forcible demands and extraction of wealth and resources to be redistributed. This is not a struggle. It's a shared set of values. There's no one that's being overthrown. Everything is in God's hands. People are in this example that they're citing of what they hope for. It's all this voluntary decision of what people are doing because they are choosing Christ. They are choosing to follow his commandments. And it is Christ's gospel that kind of eradicated the class division and the different tribes and the inequality. It was not a struggle. It was not a competition. It was not a government program or law or mandate of any kind. To the contrary, it was people voluntarily choosing to live this way. And then they say that early Mormon leaders prophetically counseled that the wonderful growth of wealth in the hands of a comparatively few individuals and corporations was one of the great evils of our nation. Well, This is, when this group met a few months ago from that article that I read, this is the document. They read this document together. This was kind of their biblical, like, hey, let's, this is our platform. Let's read what these early Mormon leaders talked about. Well, this is from a pamphlet in July of 1875, what was called an Apostolic Circular. It was published by the church, but it was kind of a 5-year progress report of the Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Association, which grew into ZCMI. So it was a league of Mormon merchants who, instead of competing one another, decided to cooperate. They would buy from one another and kind of keep the money and keep the wealth in Mormon hands, and that was kind of the concept. And so this pamphlet, which was a ringing endorsement of the Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Association that they were doing, it wasn't a statement of general church doctrine. It wasn't a comment on the American economy, which, frankly, Utah barely participated in that point. They were kind of keeping everything very insular. This was a pamphlet designed to convince the Latter-day Saints that ZCMI, as I'll call it, was going strong, but that it needed their involvement. It needed their support, that in a sense of solidarity, that they should be loyal to and shop at ZCMI to keep money in Mormon hands. There are versions of this article floating around as the Proclamation on the Economy, clearly trying to borrow from the Proclamation on the Family in terms of its gravitas and its prestige. That is a completely made-up title. The folks who circulate this online under that banner of the Proclamation on the Economy typically cut it down to like a third of its length. They don't share the full context, which would reveal that this is not some general doctrinal thing or general comment. It's this very contextual thing. Yes, the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles signed it in 1875, but it was in a different context. It's almost like Joseph Smith talking about the Kirtland Safety Society. Right? It's like you can't imbue from that this general economic, prophetic statement. It's like, hey, we're doing this limited context thing. We're doing this economic enterprise. Here are our thoughts about it. We are the managers of this business enterprise, and here's what we are, saying in that context. Let's read a quoted portion, in fact, the quoted portion from their manifesto, but with a bit more context. One of the great evils with which our own nation is menaced at the present time is the wonderful growth of wealth in the hands of a comparatively few individuals. The very liberties for which our fathers contended so steadfastly and courageously, and which they bequeathed to us as a priceless legacy, are endangered by the monstrous power which this accumulation of wealth gives to a few individuals and a few powerful corporations. By its seductive influence, results are accomplished which, were it more equally distributed, would be impossible under our form of government. It threatens to give shape to the legislation, both state and national, of the entire country. If this evil should not be checked and measures not be taken to prevent the continued enormous growth of riches among the class already rich, and the painful increase of destitution and want among the poor, the nation is liable to be overtaken by disaster. For according to history, such a tendency among nations once powerful was the sure precursor of ruin. Now, as I read on, there's all kinds of stuff in here that does not support this Proclamation on the Economy concept that these Marxists and others like them are trying to use, this pamphlet, this economic business enterprise pamphlet, to have some side. They say the early Mormon leaders prophetically counseled. That was not the context. That was not what's going on here. It continues. It reads, in the absence of the necessary faith to enter upon a more perfect order revealed by the Lord unto the church, this, meaning their Zion's cooperative, was felt to be the best means of drawing us together and making us one. Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution, ZCMI, was organized, and throughout the territory, the mercantile business of the various wards and settlements was organized after that pattern. Not only was the mercantile business thus organized, but in various places, branches of mechanical, manufacturing, and other productive industries were established upon this basis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so felt to be, right? In the absence of a more perfect order revealed by the Lord unto the church. In other words, the Lord has not revealed anything. We're waiting for counsel. We're waiting for revelation. In the absence of that revelation, this was felt to be the best means of drawing us together and making us one. This was not a revelatory thing. This was Brigham and others thinking up like, hey, here's what we ought to do in order to, help people survive and carve out a life in the wilderness. They go on and they end up talking about like financial reporting. And it's, again, kind of a progress report. 5 years in, here's how we're doing. right? During the first 4.5 years of its existence, it paid to its stockholders a dividend in cash of 78% and 52% as a reserve to be added to the capital stock, making in all a dividend of 130%. This is not a broad economic revelation. This is not a doctrinal principle. It's a justification for the co-op's existence. And so, it ends with this. Does not all our history impress upon us the great truth that in union is strength? Without it, what power would the Latter-day Saints have? But it is not in doctrines alone that we should be united, but in practice, and especially in our business affairs, right? In union is strength. That's the quote. Does not all our history impress upon us the great truth that in union is strength? Which is interesting. That's from the 1868 campaign slogan for the Republican Ulysses Grant. Keep in mind, again, the Republican Party was founded to fight the twin barbarisms of slavery and polygamy. So the early Mormons were no fans of the Republican Party. This is the Republican candidate's slogan, in union is strength. Kind of funny to have Mormon leaders a decade later quoting it. A few decades after that, here's from the International Socialist Review saying it was imperatively necessary for all the opponents of absolutism to unite. Certainly, there is nothing more desirable than such a union, for in union is strength. So here you got socialists saying, you got Republicans saying it, but I repeat myself, you got, the early Mormon leaders saying it, in union is strength. Kind of funny. Okay, key point here. This is a voluntary cooperative. It's protectionism to keep Mormon money in Mormon hands. That's it. It's not communism. It's not Marxism. It's not forcible redistribution, right? Again, here's this quote. Everyone who can should take stock in it. By sustaining the cooperative institution and taking stock in it, profits that would otherwise go to a few individuals will be distributed among many hundreds. This is not, this is capitalism. They're encouraging capitalism. Please buy stock. Please buy private ownership. We want it diffused into the hands of the many rather than concentrated in a few hands. That's fine, right? But it's still capitalism. It is private ownership. It is not the redistribution of anything. So it's hilarious for these Mormon Marxists to use this pamphlet and to use these words as somehow their Lenin-esque, basis for having all things in common and struggling for a world in which the workers own the means of production. They say capitalists have created a system that forces working people to give the fruits of their labor to the wealthy or die. Look, in a state of nature, everyone must give the fruits of their labor or die. Like that is the kind of natural order of things. If you don't work, you perish. You are not entitled to anything. If you're stranded on an island and you don't work, you will die, right? So to say that capitalists force working people to give the fruits of their labor to them or to die, it's just absolutely ridiculous. All individuals have worth, they have value they can create. Some it's physical labor, some it's, mental labor, right? It's skills, it's creating products, it's hard labor, whatever it is. But that is not being forced to give the fruits of your labor to the wealthy or die. That is the mutual voluntary exchange of what you have value enough to contribute. The education you've received, the knowledge, the skills you've acquired. It's ridiculous for them to say that Marxist nonsense. They also say that it necessitates disenfranchising an exploited class who live under the dictatorship of the ruling class, which is exactly backwards. Capitalism, so-called, not crony capitalism, like actual free markets and innovation and entrepreneurship, that type of capitalism enfranchises people. They're saying it necessitates disenfranchising an exploited class. No, capitalism enfranchises people. It empowers people. It ennobles people. Today's poor live greater than kings did 100 years ago. Capitalism and the innovation that results from it is the rising tide that lifts all boats. Everyone is enfranchised to capitalism, not this totally backwards thing that they're saying. And it's no dictatorship at all. I mean, these terms show how ridiculous the Marxists are in creating straw men like this to say that they live under the dictatorship of the ruling class. Give me a break. They're just total nonsense. Okay, let's move on to number 2. We hope and struggle for the equitable distribution of resources. The Lord has said, the earth is full, and there is enough and to spare. Yea, I prepared all things, and have given unto the children of humanity to be agents unto themselves. Our distribution of the abundance of resources we possess is a choice. We produce enough food to feed the world over. have more vacant houses than unhoused people, and extract resources through neo-imperial slavery, while billionaires race to see who will become the first trillionaire. It is not given that one man should possess that which is above another. Millions die every year because resources are hoarded by the wealthy and powerful instead of used to clothe the naked and to feed the hungry and to liberate the captive and administer relief to the sick and the afflicted. Early Mormon leaders prophetically counseled. The experience of humankind has shown that the people of communities and nations among whom wealth is the most equally distributed enjoy the largest degree of liberty and are the least exposed to tyranny and oppression. Hoarding wealth and resources is sinful. It is well past time we build a society that rejects this wicked practice. If anyone shall take of the abundance which I have made and impart not his portion according to the law of my gospel unto the poor and the needy, he shall with the wicked lift up his eyes in hell, being in torment. We demand this incredible wickedness cease. We struggle for a world where we have brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly, filled the hungry with good things, and sent the rich away empty, making the hoarded wealth of the rich slippery that the rich cannot hold them, allowing the wealth to be distributed equitably to people around the world according to people's wants and their needs, inasmuch as their wants are just. Wow. Oh. Ugh. Okay, equity, right? Equity is Marxism. They're saying the equitable distribution, not equal. They're saying the equitable. This is a code word for Marxism. It is the coercive redistribution of property. It is the entitlement of the have-nots demanding the resources of the haves. That is the E in DEI. Equity is straight up Marxism. They're talking about the forcible transfer of wealth and property from people to those who feel that they deserve it, that they merit it, that they ought to be given it because of their, to remedy the inequality and the privilege and the whatever, the systemic imbalances. And then, my ancestors once experienced this horrible thing, therefore you owe me reparations. Like all of that is wrapped up in equity. They say that we possess enough food to feed the world over. We do not possess anything. Individuals possess anything. There's no collective ownership over the world's resources. Everything is God's. Frankly, we're mere stewards of the property. We actually don't own anything in that sense. We're stewards of this property, but everything is His. There's no we. There's no collective ownership of property. They're saying we possess enough food. No, like individual people own food. Farms own food, right? Food manufacturers and processors own food. Individuals, grocery stores, right? They own food. There's no collective ownership of the world's resources. And so, again, their use of the collective we shows how they see this. Yes, resources should be distributed. This is the thing, right? They're not wrong oftentimes, and as you'll see in subsequent parts of their little manifesto, it's not so much that they're entirely wrong in pointing out problems. It's that they're totally backwards in proposing the remedies and solutions to those problems. They are not wrong that there is massive inequality. They are not wrong that there is hoarding. They are not wrong that, we are far off from what God wants us to be doing. They are completely wrong when they are insinuating or actively encouraging that resources be forcibly redistributed, as any Marxist struggling for a better world is going to do. It is about force. It is about laws. It is about using the arm of Caesar to coercively take from some and give to others. So yes, resources should be distributed. The rich should give to the poor. Those who are stewards over much should impart of their substance to others, 100%. But it must be done voluntarily. Christ did not command Caesar to do it. He commanded individuals to make that choice and use that agency on their own. And they are going to rise and fall based on their adherence to that commandment. Forcing them to be charitable totally negates the purpose of charity. Number 3, we hope at Struggle for a true democratic system. We affirm that in the complex dealings God has had in history, that God has suffered certain laws should be maintained for the rights and protection of all flesh, according to just and holy principles, that every human may act in doctrine and principle pertaining to futurity, according to the moral agency which God has given unto them. As people in so-called liberal democracies have fought for democratic principles, even those imbued in their legal and founding documents, they've been thwarted by the ruling class because it operates as an oligarchic dictatorship that secures itself through imperialism, colonialism, and the dissemination of propaganda and mass media bought through their decadent accumulation of capital. The people have been deceived and diverted from their vital interests by means of spectacular and meaningless duels between the two bourgeoisie parties, and no portion of the government as yet has stepped forward for our relief. A true democracy cannot exist while the ruling class controls the means of production and the levers of power, nor can it exist while imperialist nations exploit oppressed peoples around the world. While we support individual members as they strategically vote despite the fundamentally undemocratic system we struggle under, we hope and struggle for a true democratic system, one that actually respects the divine principles of agency and common consent. Again, the footnotes are funny because they're quoting Lenin and they're quoting scripture and you can just, I don't have the link pulled up, but you just Google Mormons with hope for a better world. You'll find their social media. You'll find this manifesto Google Doc. You can see all the footnotes. It's just funny. I mean, quoting Lenin in a passage about true democracy, this guy supported socialist democracy where there would be democratic control over economic enterprise, no individual ownership, everything put up to a public vote. Democracy, frankly, is awful. There's a reason why democracy is not in the founding documents of the United States. The founding fathers recognized that democracy is tyranny. It is the tyranny of the majority. It is the suppression of individual rights. And so for these Marxists to wrap themselves in this cloak of we care about people, we care about the world, we care about the poor and those who are struggling for a better world. And yet when you look throughout history, whenever Marxism has been in power, been the dominating ideology in any government, the poor get poorer and they get screwed and they don't get any ownership of the means of production, right? It's just that the new bosses are the ones that have power and control and wealth. And they're using the public as a tool. And so the poor remain poor. The minorities, there are no minority rights. And so you just get brutally, overtaken and oppressed because in a democracy, right, it's the, two wolves and a lamb deciding on, what they're going to eat for dinner type of thing, right? Total tyranny of the majority. To say a true democracy cannot exist while the ruling class controls the means of production and the levers of power. Well, the political elite don't control the means of production. Individuals do, and there's no centralized power. I'm going to show this video clip here in a minute. Found this months ago. Hilarious. Asking this socialist professor if under a system of democratic control over economic enterprise, which is what Lenin is supporting and these Marxists are all supporting, the democratic control over the economy, over companies. The question is, in that type of system, would you be able to get a PlayStation 5? Hilarious question. Take a look.
All right, final question to you, Professor Wolf. Under your system of worker cooperatives, would I still get my PlayStation 5?
Absolutely. You'd have to struggle a little bit for it. You'd have to talk to your fellow workers. You'd have to talk about the distribution of income. You'd have to compare your desire for PlayStation against all the other interests of all the other people. It wouldn't be something you worked out on your own with your particular boss in any way. It would have to be a democratic decision. You'd have to come to terms with that the way you do with democratic decisions now in our society to the extent that we have them.
Hilarious, right? You have to struggle for your PlayStation 5. You have to persuade everyone else. You have to put it up to a democratic vote, which is asinine. Well, I mean, is it like I want to go buy flour at the shop, at the grocery store, so I need to put that up to a democratic vote? Hey, I need new flip-flops, or I want the soda for lunch. Like they have no conception of what is put up to a democratic vote, and therefore everything is, And of course, the reality here is a PlayStation 5 would never be created under a system like this because you would never be able, you would struggle so much to persuade other people to invest resources in the production of something that everyone else would have animosity and be fighting to take those scarce resources, because it's all scarcity mentality, fixed mindset, right? Fixed pie. Oh, no, but we can't invest those resources there. That's squandering. That's why when you look under Marxist governments throughout history, there's no art, there's no beauty, there's no entertainment, there's no leisure. It's all just gray and drab and oppressive because no one's going to justify in a struggle the investment of resources in leisurely activities, in beauty, in art, in whatever, right? In a PlayStation 5. It would never exist. Would never become created. So this question is kind of silly that would you ever be able to purchase one? It presumes that one would be invented and produced in a system like that, which is completely asinine. Number 4, We hope and struggle to abolish prisons and policing as we know them. The modern carceral system perpetuated by the prison industrial complex, the ruling class disgustingly profits off of, is a form of cruel and unusual punishment. It must be abolished. As the prophet Joseph Smith said, abolish the cruel system of prisons and let reason and friendship reign over the ruins of ignorance and barbarity. Open the prisons, open the eyes, open the ears, and open the hearts of all people to behold and enjoy freedom, unadulterated freedom. This is the call of all who will seek a just world. We struggle for the abolition of the modern carceral system as we reinvest in our community's education, housing, and basic needs. Crime is a consequence of desperation and destitution. It will only be solved by restorative forms of justice that seek to care for all those in our communities. It has not and will not be solved by police forces patterned after American slave patrols who currently operate as occupying armies in minority and low-income communities. Our heavenly parents sent Jesus to earth to proclaim release to the incarcerated and freedom for those who are oppressed. As disciples of Jesus, we move in that same spirit and for that same purpose. All right. Yes, there are private prisons. Not a fan. But they're only 8% of the total system. And yet this portrays it as the ruling class disgustingly profits off of the the prison industrial complex. It's 8%. 8% private ownership. The Joseph Smith quote, by the way, that they're using in full is fascinating. It is from his presidential campaign when he was running for president in 1844 to try and get the word out, the plight of the Mormons, try to raise awareness, try to, spread the message. The quote in full: "Petition your state legislatures to pardon every convict in their several penitentiaries, blessing them as they go and saying to them in the name of the Lord, go thy way and sin no more. Advise your legislators when they make laws for larceny, burglary, and any felony to make the penalty applicable to work upon roads, public works, or any place where the culprit can be taught more wisdom and more virtue and become more enlightened. Rigor and seclusion will never do as much to reform the propensities of man as reason and friendship. Murder only can claim confinement or death. Let the penitentiaries be turned into seminaries of learning, where intelligence, like the angels of heaven, would banish such fragments of barbarism. Imprisonment for debt is a meaner practice than the savage tolerates with all his ferocity. Love conquers all." Today, rather than seminaries of learning, as he calls them, prisons are breeding grounds for filth and for vice. These prisons totally fail to reform the propensities of man, as he said. Instead, in prisons, your baser instincts are affirmed. You're getting more hardened being around people like that. And the punishment continues after you serve time, right? You get this scarlet letter throughout life. It's hard to rent an apartment. It's hard to get a job. They're locked out of the very resources that they need to survive. Again, pointing out the problem here, they're spotlighting, I think, a legitimate problem, the way we incarcerate people and try and rehabilitate them. Instead, we just warehouse them in these prisons and surround them with these horrible people that harden them as criminals only to, become or remain a criminal once they get out of prison. So they're not wrong in spotlighting some of these problems. They say crime is a consequence of desperation and destitution. Well, I think this is short-sighted. They're trying to connect the criminal justice system to wealth redistribution, right? If only we would have a socialist system of redistribution of wealth, then there would be no poor, that these people would no longer be destitute, and therefore they would not commit crime. Crime would just go away, right? Crime is a consequence of desperation and destitution. It's too simplistic, right? There are plenty of people who aren't poor who commit all kinds of egregious crimes. They're thinking if only people could be guaranteed stuff, resources, benefits, then they wouldn't do bad things. It's just not true. Look, there are strong reasons for a massive overhaul to the criminal justice system. But I would say that Joseph Smith's position is perhaps a little idealistic. Requires a love-based approach, which is laughable in today's political environment. It's just kind of at odds. And I'm not saying it's wrong in that sense. It's just so heavy in contrast to what we have today. In the same statement, by the way, he says, when the people petitioned for a national bank, I would use my best endeavors to have their prayers answered. Bad idea, right? So this is Joseph Smith as presidential candidate with his platform. This is not, as the Marxists are trying to say, the prophet Joseph Smith, early Mormon leaders prophetically counseling these things. They're trying to imbue this with all kinds of religiosity. This is a presidential platform. Joseph here is saying he supports a national bank. Now, clearly he's reacting to the bank failures at the time, the context of the Kirtland Safety Society. This is how we got the Federal Reserve, was the panic of 1907. And yet again, people are freaking out that banks are closing and they're losing their savings. Won't someone save us and bail us out? And therefore we get the lender of last resort, the central bank. So to me, this just shows that not all of Joseph Smith's political views are spot on, and suggests that this prison one doesn't need to be accepted at whole cloth, right? We don't just, oh, Joseph said this political thing, and therefore, that must be true. I think Joseph is right in many ways. I think implementing this in a Caesar, incarceration system full of people who do not approach things from love and rehabilitation and forgiveness might be a bit idealistic, but I do think there are some important principles in there that should be explored, because the criminal justice system does need reform. Number 5, we hope and struggle for free, accessible, and well-funded education for all. Our mother Eve struggled for knowledge. Her acquisition of knowledge and her freely giving of that knowledge to Adam was not a sin, for it was something that Adam and Eve had to do. The glory of God is intelligence, and if a person gains more knowledge and intelligence in this life, they will have so much the advantage in the world to come. Therefore, we have a consistent ethical view that people should be able to avail themselves as expeditiously as possible of the wealth of the knowledge of arts and sciences. This is reason enough for free, accessible, and well-funded education. But more than that, we live in a system where people are distinguished by ranks according to their riches and their chances for learning. Yea, some are ignorant because of their poverty, and others receive great learning because of their riches. There is no solidarity with oppressed and working-class peoples that does not extend to solidarity in the struggle for free, accessible, and well-funded education. This includes free, accessible, and well-funded trade schools and institutions of higher education. We affirm the right to avoid debt and be free from the bondage of loans. We struggle for learning opportunities by funding libraries and museums as free and accessible public institutions. We reject censorship of literature about oppressed and minoritized peoples and their communities, recognizing a wholesome education as one that includes diverse and intersectional courses of knowledge. We hope and struggle for a world that lives into the prophetic spirit of our mother Eve and allows all to receive a free, accessible, and well-funded education. Okay, so they call this a consistent ethical view. I will concede that point. They are consistently wrong. They're consistently misguided, but it is a consistent point from the Marxist viewpoint that people should be able to, pay attention to the wording, avail themselves of free, accessible, and well-funded education, right? Availing yourself of something. I avail myself of what is available, of the resources that are here. I can eat this. I can learn this. I'm availing myself of the opportunities at hand. That is totally different from compelling others to provide things for you. You're not just availing yourself of these things that magically appear and they're totally abundant and you're at liberty to take whatever you want. No, to say that you want a free, accessible, and well-funded education inherently implies you're saying others should be forced to fund it so that I can benefit from it. When they say that they affirm the right to avoid debt and be free from the bondage of loans, who are they quoting? They're quoting President Hinckley. Check out the actual clips.
I urge you, brethren, to look to the condition of your finances. I urge you to be modest in your expenditures. Discipline yourselves in your purchases. Avoid debt to the extent possible. Pay off debt as quickly as you can, and free yourselves from bondage. We are carrying a message of self-reliance throughout the church. Self-reliance cannot obtain when there is serious debt hanging over a household. One has neither independence nor freedom from bondage when he is obligated to others.
Okay, Hinckley is saying free yourselves, right? Not compel others to free you, not compel others to pay for it to free you from the bondage of debt. Free yourselves from the bondage of debt. Of course, they completely omit that part in their manifesto, right? And yet these Marxist clowns want to obligate us to pay for them. Hinckley's saying we carry a message of self-reliance throughout the church. Yet the Marxists are saying, no self-reliance. We want everything to be free. We want it to be well-funded and accessible so that we can avail ourselves of all these benefits. We want to force you to provide us with those things. They decry debt and loans that they would have to incur on their own, self-reliance, again, to Hinckley's point. They're totally like castigating the idea of debt and loans that they would have to incur. They want to be free of that, yet they want to deprive others of their independence and freedom by obligating them to provide support. You have to pay for this, right? It's not that no one should pay. It's that I don't want to have to pay. I don't want loans. I don't have to pay for it. You all ought to pay. It's just so asinine. These people are so wrong. It may seem that I'm coming across a bit, I don't know, persnickety, a bit critical. And that's with good intent and reason, because these people are so dangerously misguided and flat out wrong. Number 6, we hope and struggle for free, accessible, and sustainable housing. Housing is a human right. Throughout his ministry, Jesus was unhoused, having nowhere to lay his head. By rejecting people their fundamental right to housing, we not only do violence to an image of God, but we reject the mercy Jesus himself relied on in his mortal life. The prophet Micah suggests there isn't anything the Lord requires of us but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with our God. Paul similarly stated that love of neighbor is the sum of the whole law. The Lord proclaimed, providing housing that strangers may come from afar to lodge in is essential for Zion. We demand the United States recognize housing as a fundamental human right, as most countries have around the world. We also demand the countries of the world take measurable steps to guarantee free, accessible, and sustainable housing for all people. Any struggle for recognition of housing as a right must be rooted in a commitment to ensure every child of God a good life full of diverse and fulfilling experiences with communities united in love. Therefore, until the nations of the world recognize the divinity of every human being and guarantee all their citizens these essential rights, we hope and struggle for free, accessible, and sustainable housing, free, sustainable, environmentally friendly, and accessible public transportation, and sustainable and accessible communities. Oh my gosh, just facepalm. Housing is not a right. There are positive rights and there are negative rights, right? All of the rights in the Constitution are negative rights in the Bill of Rights. The right to be left alone, the right to have things not happen to you. A negative right, all rights have corresponding duties. There cannot be a right without a duty. Negative rights have negative duties. I have the right to life, therefore you have the negative duty not to kill me, right? You have the negative duty not to kill me. I have the right to speech. You have the negative duty to not censor me. Okay? I have the right to free association, a negative right. You, therefore, have the negative duty to leave me alone. Let me affiliate with whoever I want to affiliate. Don't force me to associate with people I don't want to. Negative rights are the only true rights. And they carry negative duties. No one has to do anything for me. You basically just got to leave me alone. Let me maintain my rights. Those are negative rights, the only true rights. What the Marxists are all talking about is positive rights, so-called. Positive rights have positive duties. A positive right to free, accessible, and well-funded education comes with a positive duty that someone then has to pay for said education. A similar right to health care, right, carries a duty for someone to proactively, positively provide that health care. And so here, to say that housing is a right, it is a positive right. It can only be created through legislation forcing people to do something, and it carries a duty. Taxpayers must fund this for you. They want housing to be free, accessible, and sustainable. They want to ensure every child of God a good life full of diverse and fulfilling experiences. They want it to be guaranteed. I mean, remember, Satan wanted to guarantee things. That was his plan in the premortal realm. He didn't want people to be left to their own devices, to their agency, to make mistakes, to miss out, to be denied. He's like, hey, let's all eat, drink, be merry, and I'm going to guarantee salvation for everyone. That's what these people are talking about. They're effectively Satanists. And it sounds like what they're saying basically, comes straight from the fellow Marxist Constitution of the USSR in 1936, under Section 10, titled Fundamental Rights and Duties of Citizens. There's a long list of positive rights that are presented, each of which requires the enforcement of, some positive duty on someone's part to provide for that right. Citizens were afforded the right to rest and leisure under this Constitution, the right to maintenance in old age, and also in case of sickness or loss of capacity to work, the right to education, including higher education being free of charge. The Soviet Constitution was full of these positive rights guaranteeing stuff, but it necessarily implied that they were forcing everyone to provide all these things. That's what these people are asking for. They want free housing. They want to be ensured a good life full of diverse and fulfilling experiences. They basically want to take away agency. They don't want to have to work out their own salvation. They don't want to be responsible for their own choices. They want guarantees. They want to be insured. They want positive rights, and they want us to bear the positive duties. Number 7, we hope and struggle for a healthy world that evades climate catastrophe. We proclaim boldly that there is a future where the earth is glad, no longer pained and wearied by the violence done to her. The earth is not ours. The earth belongs to God. I, the Lord, stretched out the heavens and built the earth, my very handiwork, and all things therein are mine. Every person is accountable for maintaining what our heavenly parents have made and prepared for their creatures. Humans possess the wonderful gift of agency that said, our agency should not be interpreted as license to use or consume the riches of this world without wisdom or restraint. Unfortunately, thus far, the bourgeoisie interests of the ruling class have included ignoring scientific consensus about the consequences of their reckless resource extraction. The earth will not be violated without consequence. These gross violations of the earth are sinful and spell calamity for our species. We hope and struggle for a world where the earth is respected and cared for, and the various species that dwell upon the earth are not abused by ephemeral human industrial aims. We hope and struggle for a green world that abandons oil and gas and utilizes renewable forms of energy. We hope and struggle for a world not imperiled by ruthless and reckless corporations controlled by the wealthy. We hope and struggle for green cities, the preservation of nature and national parks, indigenous sovereignty over lands and cultural sites important to indigenous peoples, and the maintenance of the divine balance of natural ecological systems. Okay. These remaining ones I'm going to, breeze by and not spend a lot of time on, but the fact that the bourgeoisie interests have ignored scientific consensus, which is hilarious. Like, the science is settled, and everyone who gets funding from all these government programs agrees with the government that we have climate change caused by humans. They want a green world that abandons oil and gas while not recognizing that God gave us oil and gas and enough and to spare. Like, this is one of the resources the Lord has provided us. They want indigenous sovereignty over lands, yet the scriptures are full of examples of God sending people to take land from other people, to tear them to pieces as the consequence for sin, not simply honoring whoever was there last. But this whole obsession over, you see the left doing this. We acknowledge that we are on the land that once belonged to the Sham Shalamawang Kaban tribe, and, I'm sorry, I don't want to be too insulting. These are God's children as well. But the silly point of of kowtowing to these indigenous peoples that once lived there, and yet all of those indigenous people that are being honored and recognized by the left themselves stole the land, conquered some other people that were there before. The history of the world is one of warring tribes and factions and countries taking control of land. And so this idea that there's indigenous sovereignty over land ignores the reality that there's no inherent claim to the land by any one indigenous group of people. Okay, we hope and struggle for a world free of war, colonialism, and imperialism. Number 8, the Lord has commanded that we renounce war and proclaim peace. Nevertheless, we recognize that there are many around the world who have engaged in and do engage in righteous, violent struggle in line with divine principles, not fighting for power, but for their homes and their liberties. A riot is the language of the unheard, and it is the oppressor who defines the nature of the struggle, and the oppressed is often left no recourse but to use methods that mirror those of the oppressor. Violence creates violence. The mechanisms of imperialism create one continual round of murder and bloodshed. If we seek to truly renounce war, we must engage in the struggle to dismantle it at its foundation, the structural violence inflicted by neo-colonial and imperial powers. We stand firmly against the military-industrial complex and oppose all forms of imperialism, election interference, and destabilization of sovereign nations, colonization, apartheid, and occupation as the root causes of war. We firmly reject any use of Mormon scripture, they continue, for the purposes of advocating for, defending, or engaging in colonialism, imperialism, or occupation. Our worship of a Palestinian Jew lynched by an occupying army demands that we do not contort the meaning of Scripture in defense of the very dehumanizing forces that justify the murder of our God. Inherent to our struggle is a commitment to decolonization and anti-imperialism. We therefore stand in solidarity with colonized peoples around the world and acknowledge our own lamentable role in colonization, displacement, and occupation. We demand our governments stop using our money to finance war crimes, election interference, and predatory foreign policies around the world. We hope and struggle for a free Turtle Island, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, and indigenous sovereignty over historic lands around the world. We call for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions on the apartheid state of Israel as we struggle for a free Palestine. We hope and struggle for international nuclear disarmament, demilitarization of imperial powers, as well as an end to imperial and neo-colonial global systems and resource extraction, United States international military bases, the United States embargo on Cuba, and antagonistic imperialist Cold War politics and foreign policy. Wow, there's a lot there. A lot I agree with. I, too, am against the military-industrial complex. And I, too, believe we need to renounce war and proclaim peace. I, too, believe colonial imperial powers have created all kinds of violence. What I find hilarious is that they're saying here that but fighting, our fight is just because we're wrapping ourselves in the Captain Moroni mantle of the title of liberty, that we're fighting for our homes and our liberties. So our struggle is okay. Our violence is okay because it's not actually our fault. It's set by, what did they say? It's the oppressor defines the nature of the struggle. And the oppressed is often left no recourse but to use methods that mirror those of the oppressor. So they're shirking any accountability or blame for their own violence, for their own conflict-based struggle, and they're pushing on the oppressors. It's their fault. It's asinine. They kind of get it right in some of this stuff. Like, yeah, I agree with you some of these problems, but then their solutions are all over the map. Number 9, we hope and struggle for a world without borders. God shows no partiality, and we ought to do the same. The modern border system is only 100 years old and was designed to maintain imperialist structures at the expense of the progress, learning, and growth of people around the world. Capital owners, in collaboration with the leaders of imperial nations, do great harm to some nations by ensuring they can never be competitive in global economies through unethical violations of those nations' sovereignty, and then, in direct violation of God's impartiality, confine particular peoples to those oppressed nations. Capitalists do this so they can exploit workers in those nations for cheap, underpaid labor. Early Mormons were the target of earlier predatory anti-immigration tactics. A large numbers of immigrants with the avowed purpose of joining the Mormon community must be prevented to come hither to the United States. Not only does our own history compel us to oppose anti-immigration politics, but we must also remember that the Savior knows how it feels to be a refugee because he was one. We support immigrants and immigration. Humans existed without the modern border system for hundreds of thousands of years and can and should exist without it now. We affirm that the immigrant who resides with us shall be to us as the native born among us, and that we shall love the immigrant as ourselves. We accordingly hope and struggle for the abolition of the cruel, unusual, and unjust modern border system. We affirm the right of every human being to roam the earth freely and dwell among different peoples for a time, yea, and perhaps until the day they die, insofar as those humans respect the sovereignty of given lands to those indigenous to those lands. Ugh, look, communists had borders as well. So this idea that Marxism means like no borders at all, and borders as jurisdictional boundaries are fine because groups of people will gather, they will have a demarcation of property, just like you have your property. Here is my property line. I have jurisdiction. This is my home. That is your home. That is your castle. You do with it what you want over there. I do with it. Right. So jurisdictional boundaries as borders, totally fine. They are correct that I believe people do have a fundamental right to migration. In fact, the Constitution was once very simpatico with that, as were treaties that the United States was making with other countries through the 1800s, acknowledging the inherent and inalienable right of individuals to migrate, to move around freely. Not citizenship. We're not talking about being able to vote and all that kind of stuff. That's naturalization. But for a long time, America did recognize the inherent right, not a positive right that's created, but the natural right for an individual to roam the earth, to move, to migrate. And I document in Latter-day Liberty, my first book, all of the kind of unconstitutional aspects of our modern immigration system, their immoral aspects. And so these guys, again, pointing out the right problem, solutions we're going to quibble about, right? I mean, it's funny that they want open migration, quote, insofar as those humans respect the sovereignty of given lands to those indigenous to those lands. So they're for borders and sovereignty, but only for the indigenous people. They're like this protected class for some reason, ignoring, again, the fact that the indigenous likely stole the land from someone else at some point as well. All right, let's wrap up with the 10th one, final point in their Marxist Mormon manifesto. Number 10, we hope and struggle for an equal society without unjust social systems. Historically characterized as a separate, physiological, inferior race which possessed innate imbecility and brutal ferocity, and a body rife with peculiarities stripped of autonomy whenever inconvenient, and ourselves victims of incredible violence at the hands of lynch mobs and the state, we as Mormons were a historically oppressed group. At the same time, we as Mormons have ourselves been a violent, subjugating, and powerful group in various regions we've colonized and occupied, displacing and murdering indigenous communities and engaging in the enslavement of Native and Black peoples. White Mormons have themselves been oppressors. White Mormons today have acquired a potent and powerful capital W whiteness for themselves through uncritical and unyielding patriotism, the subjugation and oppression of women, BIPOC peoples, and queer communities, and participation in and upholding of unjust systems. We call on Mormons everywhere to understand the tentative acquisition of power in systems built on the exploitation of and inequality of some peoples at the exorbitant opulence of other peoples by remembering the historical injustice, racism, and puritanical sexual politics that oppressed our ancestors and forebears, and to accordingly repent and reject such acquisitions of power. We will not stand idly by when the blood of our neighbors is at stake. Until we are all free, we are none of us free. Therefore, with this remembrance and call to action, we hope and struggle for an equal society for all peoples. We accept our calling as Christians to believe in Christ and view his death and suffer his cross and bear the shame of the world. Therefore, we seek to burn the privilege acquired by the sins of our ancestors and forebears as we commit ourselves to be accomplices in struggles for liberation led by and for oppressed peoples. We seek not for power, but to pull it down. The Christian gospel will always be one of liberation for the least of these and all oppressed peoples. We commit ourselves to that gospel. Therefore, we are committed to anti-racism, intersectional feminism, trans and queer liberation, disability justice, individual bodily autonomy, reproductive justice, socialism, anti-imperialism, and decolonization. Our heavenly parents weep because of oppressive systems which are great chains that veil the whole face of the earth. We struggle in solidarity with oppressed groups around the world in their fights to break these chains, namely the chains of capitalism, imperialism, colonialism, occupation, apartheid, racism, sexism, ableism, queer phobia, carceral systems, and religious and ethnic persecution. We seek consciously and actively to eradicate all of these oppressive systems for the liberation of all. Wow. The Christian gospel will always be one of liberation for the least of these and all oppressed peoples. Therefore, we commit ourselves to blah, 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 reproductive justice, blah, blah, blah. So the unborn babies are the total least of these, and yet they want the unfettered right to kill them. That is part of their Christian gospel, that's what they're committed to. It's just, this whole thing is just nuts. You know, it's total, mixing of philosophies of men mingling with scripture type of thing, right? Just philosophies of horrible people like Karl Marx. When you look into his history, the dude was just a fat slob that was a leech on other people and didn't do anything productive with his life. And these ideas that he came up with that people are trying to somehow reconcile and intertwine with Mormon theology is just so asinine. I subscribed to these people's newsletter when I first found out about them. I signed up on their website. I think they sent out like a monthly email. It's just hilarious. Here's our reading for the month, and here's what we're focusing on. And it's just poor misguided souls trying to like shoehorn Marxism into some, Mormon theology. Again, fundamentally, like looking writ large at all of this, it all boils down to agency and persuasion, right? Personal freedom. Everything that they're talking about in terms of a solution is at odds with Christ's gospel. Nowhere did Christ compel people to use the coercive arm of the state to do what he was commanding them to do these acts of righteousness, to help the poor, to provide for those in need, to create social justice, to, create equality, all of these things. They were individual commandments. God wants us to do them, right? It is not, he wasn't calling on the Roman, empire or the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin to create systems that would then tax and redistribute and provide these things. No, everything was an individual commandment. It is all agency. If you are forced to be righteous, if you are taxed to be charitable, it completely undermines the purpose. There has to be choice. There has to be personal accountability. There has to be initiative. It has to be on the individual. And so these Mormon Marxist morons are totally off base in that all of their proposals, which again, as Marxists is no surprise, are inherently government-based. They want laws, they want programs, they want coercion, they want people forced to be doing these things. They want the rich to be taxed. They want programs, they want guaranteed housing, they want guaranteed, free education. They want all these things, and the government is who they look to. The government is their God. We do not share the same God. Whatever Mormonness these people have is completely negated by the fact that they subscribe to a Marxist ideology. The government is their God. Caesar is their God. They want, like Satan was proposing, to be guaranteed an outcome. Satan was guaranteeing salvation. Do whatever you want. You're not accountable for it. You're not responsible for it. I got you. You eat, drink, and be merry. You have fun. I got you. I'll save you. Right? Not one soul shall be lost. Right? That is Satan's stratagem. Eat, drink, and be merry, and have no consequences, and you can partake of the spoils of these secret combinations, and we will provide these things for you. That is what these people are after. They want to be ensured a good life with good experiences. They want to be guaranteed free housing. They want to be guaranteed free education. They want all these things handed to them, and that is Caesar. That is Satan, who is behind Caesar. That is their God. These people are idolatrous. They do not worship the same God as I do. Wish them the best. I hope they overcome their misguidedness in all of this. But I just have to laugh at the foolhardy attempt to try and reconcile two polar opposite things, because you can't get away from the fact that Christ demands we act as individual agents, as individual stewards. It is on us to voluntarily follow God, to voluntarily live the commandments, to be righteous or not on our own accord, to work out our own salvation. And these people will have none of it. They want collective salvation. They want collective ownership. They want collective guarantees and benefits. We do not speak the same language. We do not worship the same God. So again, I wish them the best. I hope they overcome their foolhardy approach here. But it, to me, is just an attempt to bastardize our religion to support this totally flawed and ultimately fatally destructive ideology that's been responsible for killing tens of millions of people. See you next Sunday.